The twins were barefoot. Mud covered their pajamas, and one clung to a shredded teddy bear. Their mother had bruises on her cheek, her lip was split, and her eyes looked like they hadn't known kindness in years. When a single dad opened his front door that rainy night, he didn't ask questions. He just stepped aside and said, "Come in. You're safe here now." The thunder cracked as if the sky itself were split in half. In a modest two-bedroom house on the edge of a quiet Oregon town, Daniel Brooks tucked his son in for the night. The roof still leaked in the hallway, and the heater groaned with every gust of wind. But inside that little bedroom, warmth lived, in the form of bedtime stories, forehead kisses, and the promise that tomorrow would be a little better. But Daniel's night was far from over. A desperate banging at the door jolted him back down the creaky stairs. It wasn't the usual late-night delivery mix-up or teenagers messing around. No, it was different. He could feel in his gut. He opened the door, and time paused. A woman stood there soaked to the bone, hair sticking to her cheeks, an old cardigan clinging to her small frame. Her arms wrapped tightly around two trembling girls who looked no older than 6. Identical, except one had a black eye, and the other had dried blood beneath her nose. Their mother's voice cracked when she spoke. "Please, I didn't know where else to go. They threw us out. Please." Daniel didn't hesitate. He didn't need the details. Not yet. All he saw was pain. All he felt was that no one deserved to be out in this storm, especially not children. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The warmth of the house hit them like a wave, but the woman didn't relax. Not fully. She kept glancing over her shoulder, like someone might be chasing them. "I'm Daniel," he said softly, leading them toward the couch. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you here." She nodded, silently thanking him with trembling lips. One of the girls began to cry, quietly, as if even her sobs had been punished too many times before. "I'm Callie," the woman finally said, barely audible. "These are my daughters, Mia and Lacey." He handed her a blanket and gently knelt to the twins. "Hi, Mia. Hi, Lacey. I've got peanut butter sandwiches. Think you can help me eat a few?" The girls glanced up at their mom, who gave the faintest nod. It wasn't trust. It wasn't safety. But it was the first crack in the wall. Daniel walked toward the kitchen, heart pounding. He wasn't rich. He wasn't special. Just a blue-collar dad doing construction during the week and fixing bikes on the weekends. But right now, none of that mattered. He had what they needed most. Kindness. As the kettle began to boil and the girls nibbled timidly at their sandwiches, Daniel quietly grabbed the first aid kit. The bruises weren't just new. They were layered. Years' worth. Callie flinched when he approached, but when she saw the gentleness in his hands, she lowered her guard. Just enough. He cleaned her split lip. She whispered, "I wasn't always like this." He nodded gently. "You don't need to explain anything right now. Just rest." But even as Callie and her girls finally closed their eyes on the pull-out couch, Daniel stayed up, watching the window. Something in her story wasn't over, and he had a feeling that whatever she'd run from might not be done chasing her yet. By sunrise, the rain had eased into a misty drizzle. The world outside looked washed and quiet, but inside Daniel's house, the air was thick with tension, like a wound had been wrapped but not healed. The scent of eggs and toast floated through the small kitchen, a humble gesture from a man who didn't have much, but gave all he could. Callie sat at the edge of the couch, wearing one of Daniel's old flannel shirts over her bruises, her eyes on her daughters who curled under the blanket like kittens beside a furnace. The night had left her skin pale and her body stiff, but it was the silence in her eyes that unsettled Daniel the most. "You don't have to talk," he said gently, placing a warm plate in front of her. "But you can. I'm not going to judge you." She didn't lift her head right away. Instead, she stared at the plate, scrambled eggs, toast, and apple slices cut neatly the way a dad does for a kid who still believes fruit shapes mean love. Slowly, her fingers reached for the fork. "My husband's family hated me the moment they met me," she murmured, voice cracking like dry leaves. "They said I was just a waitress. Trash. Not good enough for their son." Daniel didn't interrupt. He leaned on the counter, nodding quietly. I thought he loved me. I really did. But the moment I got pregnant, he changed. And his mother, God, she treated me like I'd stolen something from her. She told me to my face, that if it weren't for the babies, she'd have me dragged out of the house. Callie's hand shook slightly, but she kept going, voice barely above a whisper. He hit me for the first time when I was 6 months along. Pushed me because I asked him to lower the TV while I was sleeping. His excuse? Said I was making him feel trapped. His father laughed. Said that's what women do. Trap men with babies. Daniel's stomach turned. I stayed, she said hollowly. I stayed because I didn't have anyone else. I stayed because I thought if I just held on a little longer, maybe he'd remember the man I fell in love with. She glanced over at Mia and Lacey, who were still asleep, their little hands curled around each other's like a shield. But last night, she looked up for the first time, eyes bloodshot and brimming. His mother grabbed Lacey's arm too hard, left a bruise. When I screamed at her, my husband punched me so hard I blacked out. When I came to, they were throwing our clothes in trash bags and shoving us out the front gate. It was raining. I carried both girls 3 miles before I saw your porch light. Daniel clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists by his side. But he didn't explode. He didn't rant. Instead, he breathed through it, steady like stone. You did the right thing, he said. You got them out. You got out. That's what matters now. Callie looked at him, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Why are you being so kind? He didn't smile. Not fully. But there was a calmness in his voice that carried weight. Because my ex walked out on me when my son was 2. I know what it means to be left behind. And I swore if I ever had the chance to stop someone else from feeling that, I would. She lowered her head again, crying quietly. Not the kind of sobs that shake the body, but the kind that come from finally being allowed to feel safe. He reached for a napkin, handed it to her. I don't have much, he said, but I've got space here. You and the girls can stay as long as you need. She blinked, staring at him, as if those words were too heavy to believe. You'd let strangers stay here? You're not strangers anymore, he replied. You're people, and people deserve kindness. For the first time since she stepped into his home, Callie smiled. Just barely, but enough to shift something in the air. And yet, that smile was short-lived. Because just as Daniel picked up the empty plates, headlights flashed outside the window. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. Callie's face drained of color. That's his brother's car, she whispered. They found me. Daniel stood slowly, his entire body stiffening. Go upstairs. Take the girls. Lock the door. What are you going to do? She asked, panic rising in her voice. He didn't answer right away. He just walked to the door, rolled his sleeves up, and said with a calm steadiness that sent a shiver through her. No one's laying a hand on you, or your daughters again. Not while I'm breathing. The knock on the door wasn't casual. It was violent. 3 deep, calculated pounds that rattled the wood frame and made Callie's heart stop. Upstairs, she hugged Mia and Lacey against her, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. It's okay. He's a good man. He won't let them hurt us. But her body trembled with every footstep on the floor below. Daniel opened the door, but only halfway. 2 men stood there. One of them was in a leather jacket, built like a linebacker with a cruel grin that reeked of entitlement. The other, thinner but no less menacing, kept glancing toward the house like he expected to be invited in. Yo, the bigger one said. You got something that doesn't belong to you. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You lost something? Yeah, he sneered, stepping closer. A woman, and 2 little brats. Callie, my sister-in-law. They ran off in the middle of the night like rats. This is family business, man. Hand them over. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't blink. His fingers tightened around the door's edge. You beat her, didn't you? He asked calmly. You? Or your brother? The big man rolled his eyes. What? She cried to you already. Women exaggerate. You know how it is. Daniel's jaw locked. She walked 3 miles in the rain with twin girls, bleeding and terrified. I know exactly how it is. You got 5 seconds to get off my porch. The thinner man stepped forward. Look, buddy, we're not here to fight. We just want to talk. You don't talk to people with bruised fists, Daniel interrupted. You don't love someone by throwing them out into a storm. Don't play hero, man. Daniel stepped out the door, now fully blocking their view inside. His voice dropped an octave. I'm not playing anything. But if you take one more step on my property, I'll call the cops. And if you think I'm bluffing, try me. The big guy stared him down. You don't know who my family is. Daniel's lips curled, not into a smile, but something colder. I know exactly what kind of man you are, and I've raised a son to never become one." There was silence. Then the bigger man spat on the ground near Daniel's boots. "We'll be back," he growled, turning away. Daniel watched them get in the SUV, watched the tires spray gravel as they pulled off into the fog. Only when their taillights disappeared did he close the door, locking it and double-bolting it. He didn't say a word. He just stood there for a moment, collecting his breath. Upstairs, Callie was crying again, but this time from something new. Someone had stood up for her. Really stood. Risked something. She heard the soft creak of the stairs and wiped her face just before Daniel stepped into the room. "They're gone," he said gently. Her lips trembled. "You didn't have to do that." "They could have." "I had to," he cut in, voice steady but not unkind. "Because someone should have done that for you a long time ago." Callie turned away, covering her face. But Daniel didn't leave. He sat at the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. "They're going to come back, and you're going to have to decide how this ends. You can stay running forever, or you can fight. But whatever you choose, I'm not walking away." Mia shifted in her sleep, curling closer to Lacey. The light from the hallway brushed over their cheeks like a silent prayer. "I don't even have a job anymore," Callie whispered. "No money, no car, no friends. I'm broken, Daniel." "No, you're not," he replied. "You're just bent, and bent things can be rebuilt." She looked at him, unsure whether to cry or smile. So instead, she simply nodded. Downstairs, Daniel grabbed a pen and notebook and began writing down everything she told him. Names, addresses, the bruises she remembered, the insults, the threats. Because the next time they showed up, it wouldn't be a standoff. It would be court, and he was going to make sure that this time, Callie wouldn't be standing alone. The next morning brought an unusual calm. The sky was still gray, and the streets were slick from the storm, but inside Daniel's house, there was something new in the air, a fragile hope like a sunrise behind thick clouds. Daniel made pancakes that morning, humming as he moved through the kitchen like nothing in the world was wrong. The smell drew the twins out first. Lacey tiptoed into the kitchen with Mia, gripping her hand tightly, both girls still wearing oversized sweatshirts that nearly swallowed their small frames. "Good morning," Daniel greeted, flipping a pancake. "I've got banana ones and chocolate chip. You get first pick since you're the bravest girls I know." Lacey cracked a half smile, while Mia clung to her sister's arm like a shy shadow. It was a small victory, but Daniel didn't miss it. Callie came down last. Her hair was damp from the shower, tied into a low braid. The bruises hadn't faded, but there was more color in her face today. Her eyes still carried weight, but they also carried resolve. "I can't stay here forever," she said softly. Once the girls were busy coloring on the floor with crayons Daniel dug out of an old storage box. "I know," he replied, sitting across from her at the table. "But you're not leaving here with nothing. We're going to build a case. Get you legal help. Get the girls enrolled in school. A fresh start." Callie swallowed hard. "What if they find us again? What if they try to take the girls?" Daniel leaned in, steady and calm. "Then we make sure they never get that chance. Not legally, not physically, not emotionally. But to do that, you have to believe you deserve to win." She stared at him, and for the first time, she didn't look away. "I want to fight," she said. "Not for me, for them." That's all I needed to hear. By noon, Daniel had called in a favor from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Janelle, an old friend who'd once worked in child protective services before starting her own practice as a domestic abuse advocate. "I've got a woman and her daughters here," he said over the phone, standing in the garage with the door shut. "She's been beaten, kicked out, threatened, and I think the family is dangerous. She needs help filing a restraining order. Probably needs emergency custody protection too." There was a pause on the other end. "You're not in over your head, are you, Dan?" "I'm already in it," he said. "Just need a rope." By evening, Janelle had arrived. She didn't come with a suit or a badge, just a warm sweater, a no-nonsense attitude, and a bag full of paperwork. She spoke to Callie privately, then took pictures of the bruises, asked questions gently but thoroughly, and nodded like someone who'd seen too many stories like this before. "We're going to file for an emergency protective order first thing tomorrow," Janelle told her. "After that, we'll request full custody and begin the documentation process. The court may order supervised visitation for their father, but given what you've told me, we'll fight that too." "Will they believe me?" Callie asked, her voice shaking. His family is rich, powerful. They know people. Janelle smiled, but it wasn't sweet. It was sharp. They don't know me. That night, Callie sat beside Daniel on the back porch, the girls asleep upstairs. She held a mug of tea between her hands, steam curling into the air like breath made visible. "You didn't have to do this," she said for the third time. "And yet," Daniel replied, "I'm glad I did. You barely know me. You think I need to know someone's entire life to see they're worth helping?" She shook her head, a quiet laugh escaping her lips. "I used to dream of escaping that house," she said. "But I'd tell myself it was too late, that I was too far in. I thought if I just played the part, cleaned the house, smiled at his parents, stayed quiet, maybe they'd accept me. Maybe they'd treat the girls better. But they only got worse." Daniel was silent, letting her speak. "They used to make me eat separately," she continued. "Said I wasn't family. The girls, they weren't allowed in the main living room. His mother said it would dirty the carpets. And my husband? He didn't say a word, just nodded like he agreed. A pause. I stayed because I thought I didn't matter. But watching you treat my girls like they do, I realized how wrong I was." Daniel reached over and gently rested his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. "You matter, Callie. You've always mattered. But now, you get to decide what your future looks like. Not them." She looked at him, and something shifted, an invisible wall crumbling just slightly. "You're a good man, Daniel." He didn't respond with words. He just gave her a look that said everything he didn't need to say. In the distance, the wind rustled through the trees. But inside the house, inside that quiet moment, there was peace. For the first time in years, Callie finally began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she and her daughters could have a life worth living. A week passed like a whirlwind. Each day began with early morning meetings and ended with exhausted eyes and whispered bedtime stories. But underneath the exhaustion, something was growing, something quiet but powerful. Strength. Callie was transforming before Daniel's eyes. Gone was the trembling woman who stood on his porch soaked in fear. In her place stood someone who had stared down monsters and decided she wasn't running anymore. The bruises had faded, but her fire was brighter than ever. It burned quietly behind her words, behind the way she held her daughters a little tighter and walked with her shoulders pulled just a bit higher. When the court date finally came, the sky was overcast and heavy. Daniel stood beside her outside the courthouse, one hand resting on her shoulder, the other clutching the manila folder of evidence Janelle had prepared. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said truthfully, "but I'm going in anyway." Inside, the tension was thicker than cement. Her ex-husband, Brandon, arrived late, swaggering in with his father and older brother flanking him like some twisted entourage. They were dressed sharp, smug, and condescending, smirking like the courtroom was just a formality, just another way to remind her who had the money and who had none. But Callie didn't flinch. She stood her ground. The judge, a stern, silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and a tighter mouth, took her seat and looked over the stack of documents before her. Callie gave her statement clearly, her voice trembling only once when she talked about the night they were thrown out. Janelle presented photos of bruises, medical records, text messages, and even the emergency audio clip Daniel recorded on his phone when the SUV pulled up that night, capturing Brandon's brother threatening to take her back. Brandon's attorney scoffed. "Your Honor, this is clearly dramatized. My client is a respected businessman. His wife, former wife, left in the middle of the night and is now leeching off another man." The judge narrowed her eyes. "Are you implying that the woman who walked into an ER with visible bruises and 2 frightened children concocted this for financial gain? Is that your official position?" The attorney stammered. Callie sat straight. "I didn't want his money. I wanted to feel safe. I wanted my daughters to grow up without learning that violence was normal. That's why I left." The courtroom was silent. The judge turned to Brandon. "Do you deny striking your wife?" Brandon sneered. "She was always hysterical. You can't reason with someone who—" "That's not an answer." The judge cut in, her tone razor sharp. He faltered. "I don't remember. Maybe once, in self-defense." She gets loud. The judge slammed her gavel. "Enough." 2 hours later, outside the courthouse, Daniel stood beside Callie as she stared at the ruling papers in her hand. Emergency custody granted. Full restraining order approved. Court-mandated, supervised visitation only, pending further investigation. Callie turned to him slowly. I don't think I've taken a deep breath in years, she whispered. Daniel smiled, his hands in his jacket pockets. Well, take one now. You earned it. She looked at him for a long time. You didn't just help me survive, Daniel. You helped me live again. The girls ran out of the courthouse with their temporary guardian. Janelle had arranged legal child support and school transfer paperwork while Callie stood before the judge. Mia ran into her mother's arms, and Lacey jumped into Daniel's. Lacey whispered something in his ear, and he laughed. She says your pancakes are better than mine, Callie teased, smiling. Because I cheat and add extra syrup, he grinned. That evening, Daniel made spaghetti while the girls danced barefoot in the living room, their laughter echoing against the worn-out walls like music. Callie watched them, her eyes glassy. This place, it's small, but it feels like home. Daniel dried his hands on a towel and stood beside her. It can be, he said, if you want it to be. Callie looked at him, her voice barely above a breath. I do. And just like that, everything shifted. Not because he saved her, not because she owed him, but because two broken hearts, one shattered by abandonment, the other by abuse, had finally found the courage to heal in each other's company. The small house had a new coat of paint. The roof didn't leak anymore. The living room had a second couch. Callie found it at a thrift store, patched the fabric herself. She'd found a job as a bookkeeper for a local construction company, the same company Daniel had worked for years ago. She was brilliant with numbers, and her boss often said he didn't know how he'd ever functioned without her. Mia and Lacey were thriving. They giggled with Daniel's son at breakfast, argued over crayons, and ran through sprinklers like they'd never known fear. Daniel looked out the window one morning and saw Callie laughing as she watered a small row of tomato plants with the twins. Her laughter, real and loud, echoed through the yard. And in that moment, he realized something. The act of kindness he'd given that stormy night hadn't just changed their lives. It had changed his. He didn't just save a mother and her daughters. He'd found his family.